L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim. L'chaim l'vrocha to everyone. Yossi, Menachem, all our dear friends here, and all listening to the broadcasts that's going all over the world. Potential broadcast.
On YouTube.
So, Freilich and Chodesh to everyone. Chodesh Shevat today. And so I thought appropriate maybe to begin with a few words about that. I don't know if any of you remember our last Farbrengen, because if you don't, I could repeat everything I said then, and you'll all say, wow, it's good stuff, you know. Does anybody remember anything we spoke about? You do remember the jokes? The stories? Oh, okay, good. I don't even remember exactly.
Me two rabbis with that.
Yeah. As I spoke then, I mentioned then that I had the schus to remember the Rebbe's words for many years, but I never remember my own words necessarily. So, Rosh Chodesh Shevat, we're here at the oil of the Rebbe, and always, as a good Talmud, you have to always be Pesach b'divrei harav. I owe my life and my, I don't want to say career, this is called a career, but I owe my work and everything I do to being inspired and ignited by the Rebbe many years ago when I was a young teenager. So I think it's appropriate just to begin with something that's korev to yourself. You always start with something that relates. So the Chodesh Shevat is, by Chassidic Chabad especially, is the beginning of a very special month. 10 days from now will be Yud Shvat. 10 days will be Yud Shvat. It will be 71 years from the Yortzeit, the Istalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, and the Rebbe assuming leadership. But the truth is, officially the Rebbe did not assume leadership in the first year. He refused to accept being a Rebbe. A year later, so this year would mark 70 years, 1951. So this year, 2021, Tavshin Yud Aleph, Tavshin Pei Aleph, is when the Rebbe formally, on Yud Shvat, on the 10th day of Shvat, if you've ever been to 770, upstairs, the Rebbe had a Farbrengen, and he said, how do you know when a Rebbe accepts a Rebbe? He said, Amayim Chassidus. Amayim Chassidus called Basi Legani, Achesi Kala. And with that, the Rebbe assumed formal leadership. So it's 70 years, so it's a special milestone. So the Chodesh Shevat is 10 days before that. There's a letter that Rebbe wrote, which is, I remember when I read it for the first time, it had a very deep impact on me. It's a short letter. It was Rosh Chodesh Shevat 70 years ago when the Rebbe wrote this letter. It was a letter almost a year from the Yortzeit, would be coming up to the first Istalkus. So the Rebbe writes a short letter. He writes that we're coming up to Yom Halula of Yud Shvat, and the Rebbe writes these words. He writes the Kol HaKayitz, the Avar Cheref, Kol HaKayitz, the winter has passed, the summer has passed, has ended, V'adayin lo neshana, and we're still in this matzav of Golus. And then the Rebbe, these are the words that really struck me. The Rebbe writes, V'hazman esa asher shalei. Time does its thing. Now, what does that mean? I mean, Bapashas, it means when time passes, you don't have the same impact and effect on as it was during the time, even al pi halacha. It says after 12 months, even when the loved one passes away, we begin to slowly forget. We don't forget our parent or our loved one, but we don't have the same shock and the trauma and the grief that you have right in the moment. Azman esa shalei. But there's also another side to it, which isn't so positive. That slowly, everything goes back to normal. So events that were once so unique, like if we lived during the time of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, it would be the worst possible scenario. But we're thousands of years later, so we're back to normal life, so to speak. Elam kimin hagei noyeg is the expression. The world is back to. It struck me because it's so true in life. When you think about the magical, special moments. In life, we all have special, magical moments, I hope everybody here has a special moment in their life. It could be the first time you fell in love, the day of your wedding, the day your child was born, bar mitzvah, another special. But it's interesting that as time passes,
We don't always appreciate those special moments. Sometimes I walk into 770 and I go to the place where the Rebbe would Farbrengen, and right now there's nothing going on there. There's no one there. You go to places like you look at the Basi when you look, if you go to Yerushalayim, you see the Rabbi. This was once the place, the Chodesh Shevat, the holiest place on earth. And how did the Gemara describe it? The Tanoim were crying because now Shualim Helchem Bey. You see fox roaming. It's a desecration. When something is really, something's supposed to be nitzchi, eternal, but in this world, things slowly, time takes over, and we don't appreciate always those moments. If we could hold on to that magic, it would change our lives. I remember reading actually it's a very sad article. There was a journalist years ago, you may remember him, his name was Abe Rosenthal. He used to write for the New York Times. He's a Jewish writer. And when his first articles, he wrote during World War II. He was a young man, maybe he was in the early 20s. So one of his first articles was he went to visit Auschwitz. It's an article, you have to read this article. It's an unbelievable article. He writes, he's walking on the ground, on the earth. He says, here's a place, he said, where millions of Jews were killed. And he looked at the ground, he looked at the earth. He says, you don't see it. The grass is growing, it's covering up the blood, the nails, the very flesh of the millions of Jews that were killed here. And he said, look how tragic nature is. Nature covers up. You'd think that nature would protest. And no, it covers it up. The way he described how the indifference, that it's so easy to forget something when time passes, was just a very powerful way of putting it. I'll share with you a story that happened in this regard. I remember I was in London. I gave a talk in London. And I'm not sure how it came about, but I just told a story in the Gemara in the beginning of Avodah Zarah. It talks about in first night, first Shabbos on earth, Adam and Chava created on Friday, first Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara explains that that same day there was also the Chet Sadas. But that first Shabbos, the Medrash says the sun did not set that Friday night. It's Lamed Vav Shah is Shimsha Eira. 36 hours was bright. So in other words, when Adam and Chava were created, it was of course day, the morning of Friday. There was no Friday night. The sun didn't set, and all Shabbos was all light. The first sunset they ever experienced was Saturday night, Mitzvah Shabbos. And of course it was after they had eaten from the tree of knowledge and they knew what they had done. They knew what the kind of grave sin they had transgressed. When the sun began to set, the Gemara says that Adam and Chava began to tremble. Why did they tremble? Because they thought, if the sun was setting, they thought they destroyed the world. Because they never saw night before. The first time you see a night, when everything is bright and the sun is shining, they thought they destroyed the world. So they couldn't even go to sleep. They stayed up all night, davening and doing tshuva, and praying to make sure the world doesn't get destroyed. It says as the dawn began to break Sunday morning, they realized the word the Gemara says, the Elam Kiminagineg, that this darkness is not their fault. It's part of the process. So it's dark. It's not this. So obviously they lost their that passion, and they said, you know what, we can be more complacent, basically. So the word Elam Kiminagineg on one hand can sound like a very good thing. Life goes on. But it could also be a very horrible thing that you suddenly lose. When life goes on, don't worry, it's not a big thing. That's what always, you're excited about something, says, don't worry, don't get so excited, life goes on. So I told the story in my talk there in London. After I finished, a guy comes over to me. He was an elderly man. He was like crying. He was like very complete ace mensch. And he says to me, why did you tell this Gemara? So I said, no, I was talking about darkness and light. Because also there's a positive side, that just like it gets dark, even as dark as life may be, the sun will ultimately rise. There's also a positive lesson. So he said, this is mamish my story. He says, I was in Treblinka, and my whole family was killed. I was the only one that remained. I was a teenager at the time. And I remember lying in the barracks, so we had this view out the window. This hell, we had a view. There was a view. there was the Bavarian Mountains, because there, that area, the mountains in Germany, they're called the Bavarian Mountains. You saw the mountains, and you saw the sunrise. So sometimes I was so exhausted to my sleep, that I would wake up when the sun started shining through the window, and the sun would wake me up.
Where to get chairs?
The sun would wake me up, and for a moment I forgot where I was. When you're in a deep sleep, you sometimes forget, and I would think, wow, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, I see the grass out there, I see the mountains, and then I reminded myself where I am. That yes, it's a nice view, but we're in the darkest hell on earth. And I became angry at the very sun and at the birds and all the nature. I became angry because I said, why are you not protesting? Why don't you go to Shemayim and tell God that we're suffering here? Why is the sun rising every morning as if no difference? Whatever is happening, people could be killed, innocent children, destroyed, brutalized, etc. So, I don't know if you relate to this, but in psychology there's a concept when you're traumatized, you fixate on objects. It's a call to God? Yes, who's your connection? The chairs are going to come like from heaven.
It's like the best of big dish.
That's my job.
Amar Malka Al Katura. Whispers into. It's all right. I remember where I was. So he says he got fixated. He got angry at nature, and he was a Talmud Chacham. He went to yeshiva, and so it says, Ashino Hashemayim v'Sishma Oretz Im Nefi. Shemayim and Oretz, they were witnesses when Moshe made a promise with them, and we are Shemayim Oretz now. So he says, I became angry at the sun. I became angry at everything. When I finally was liberated, and here I was, an orphan, left alone. My parents were gone. My brothers and sisters were gone. My uncles, my aunt, I had nobody. I wanted God to take my life every day, because I had no reason to live after what I went through. I ended up here in London, a very angry, bitter. Life was just miserable. One night, I was exhausted from my own misery, and suddenly the sun woke me up in the morning. And that same sun that I was so angry at now gave me hope again. That even though it's dark, you see, just like the sun rises. So even though the sun had betrayed me and betrayed us all, now it wakes me up, and it changed my whole life. And here you are telling the story of the Gemara, that there's two sides to it. Oilam Kuminogene. So one of the most powerful things why we have a Farbrengen, why do we Farbrengen? Why do we come together like this? So, exactly. For most people it's the chant. I know, nobody came because of me, I know that.
I came because of you.
But if there was no chant, it may have... Okay. I'm looking for a compliment, I'm just saying. Well, what do most people go to shul for, to the Kiddush? They go to hear Divrei Torah, or they go to eat? Everyone's looking at you. There was once I think it was, who was it? From Ponovich, Rav Kalmanovich. Rav Kahneman, sorry. So he was known as being a real good fundraiser. He was a good fundraiser. So he was once invited to a dinner for one of the yeshivas.
Go on, another one? Two more benches?
There are two benches, that's good.
We want to take some more chairs? He doesn't have chairs, it's only benches.
Yeah, do you want chairs or no?
No.
Only benches, okay, that's fine.
There's enough benches now?
Yeah.
The chairs aren't necessarily more comfortable, so you're not missing one.
What?
An elderly man. Is that coming back?
Yeah, they don't have, oh, wow.
Bleachers? Did we get a bleacher?
He said his wife was waiting.
You what?
His wife was waiting. He said.
You walking away?
His wife was waiting.
Oh, okay. Everybody has a wife that's waiting.
The lecture of Kahanovich.
Okay.
I have a story about that too, but we'll get to that later.
Let's finish the other story.
And a lot of stories going on here. So anyway, once he was invited to a dinner to speak, so he said, let me speak at the end. Okay, he gets up, he says, Basi. In Yiddish, everybody understands Yiddish, yeah? I'll translate anyway, but it's Geschmack in Yiddish. He says, Basi, Bisister haben alle gerät wegen Teire. Aber meinen haben sie gemeint Geld. Ich gehe mit euch reden wegen Geld, aber meinen mir nicht Teire. He says, till now everybody was speaking about Teire, but really they mean money. You know, they say they didn't come for the Haggadah, they came for the Knedlach. You know? And I'm going to talk to you about money, but I really mean Teire. So that's the question. Tzemach Tzedek, his wife was not well, so the doctors told her that she has to eat in the morning. Make sure every morning she eats. So she would daven and then eat. Tzemach Tzedek told her, Besser, essen, sleeben daven, and vidaven, sleeben essen. So eat before you daven. Better to eat in order to daven than the other way around. I remember a bunch of Bochum came to me one year. It was Simchas Torah was Friday that year. It was Motzei Shabbos Bereishis. And they said to me, let's Farbrengen. So I said, what time you want to come to my house? They said midnight. I said, why so late? Why midnight? We have to make some achonas to the Farbrengen. So I knew what achonas they're making. I said, so which pizza shop are you going to? You know? So they said, yeah, we'll have some pizza, some falafel, after Yontif. It's a mitzvah sesa daraisa nowadays, Minhag Yisrael. Not just after Pesach, now it's every Yontif. So I said, I like pizza, frankly. But I don't know if we eat pizza in order to prepare for Farbrengen. It doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't. And I told him a story that the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, was once... he told there was a chassid, his name was Rabbi Yisrael Nevler. He was a very chassidish yid. As a boch in Lubavitch, in the city of Lubavitch in Russia, so the Rebbe Rashab told him, he was one of the first Tmimim. Tmimim is the name for the boch in the yeshiva, Temchet Tmimim. He said to Rabbi Yisrael, he said to Yisrael Nevler, that it's Kedai, you should be up Thursday night. It's a meaning by many, is to be up Thursday night. Mishmer. So good. So of course the Rebbe tells him, of course he's going to be up and learn and so on. But sometimes, you get tired. So since he had to be Mekayim the Rebbe's directive, so he would go for Thursday, he would leave Seder sometimes afternoon, and go for a nap. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe would keep meticulous attendance, and they see, when they were going over with the Rebbe Rashab, they're looking at the Bach, and they see every few Thursdays, Sol Never is gone. So the Rebbe Rashab called him in, and said to him, Yisrael, my high, what is this? See, Thursdays. So he says, the Rebbe gesagt, am darf sein auf Donnerstag Nacht. Darf machen achonis. The Rebbe said, I should be up. So the Rebbe told him, Rebbe Rashab said, was meinst du, Yisrael? Von schlafen kann man kommen zu nicht schlafen. No, sleep is not a hachana for being... So, that's all the cover, the chant, and so on and so forth. But to go back, again to what we're talking about. One of the reasons that didn't come together. So we know it's actually a takana from Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayakol Moshe, so the Medrash says, Lahakil Kehilas, Moshe established that the Jews should come together every Shabbos, which is the yesod of why we come together on Shabbos, not just to daven, to learn. Why? Because Moshe understood, and the Torah understands, that there's a certain power in a synergy. We all have our lonely journey in life. We all have our challenges, and it's very easy to be ishtachas gafne, ishtachas teinas, everybody in their comfort zone. The Torah knew that the Jews come together, it gives strength. Isha sechav yazeru, ula'achav yemen chazak. We strengthen each other. That's really what a Farbrengen is, but there's something deeper about it. It's an opportunity to remind ourselves of some things that we sometimes forget. The special moments in our lives. Like I said, Elim kiminogene. Okay, it gets dark. Who really cares it gets dark? Complacency is one of the worst curses in life. Because it was a chassid, his name was Hillel Paritcher. So in the olden days in Russia, there was no electricity. Sometimes the summer was terribly hot. So what do you do to relieve yourself from the heat? So they had cellars under the ground. You went there to get some relief because it's a little cooler. But since there's no electricity, it's also very dark there. So he once went down to one of these cellars to cool off a bit. And the other people were there, but it was pitch black. So he says, "Azay finster, it's so dark here." So one of the other chassidim says, "Don't worry, you stay here for a while, you get used to it." So he said, "That's exactly what I'm worried. I don't want to get used to it." So there's a certain element of we can manage everything. So we come to Farbrengen to remind ourselves and wake ourselves up to some of the priorities, shall we say. So in that sense, we're here exactly for that purpose. So the Rebbe's words in that letter 70 years ago, he says, Es hazman eshe asher shalei, means like, time passes and big events suddenly become not that dramatic and they're not that powerful. So it's time to sometimes reconnect. That's really what a Shabbos is supposed to be, a Yom Tov is supposed to be. Unfortunately, it's also become part of Eilim K'minogin and you eat the chont and so on and so forth. I don't know if I remember telling it last time, doesn't matter, it's always a good moshel, the moshel of the Baal Shem Tov. He actually was asked once why Chassidim drink, say, l'chaim. But the moshel could also fit very much to why we eat. As I traveled around and I give classes, many classes I give are not to Yiras Shamayim and Talmidei Chachamim and Ivdim and Maskilim like yourselves. You're in high levels. I deal with a lot of Tanei Kashanish.
You don't have to compliment.
Speak for yourself.
Mixed shvachi before.
I appreciate it. Very mixed.
Yeah. There was a guy once, he was complimenting himself.
Yeah.
And he says, just in case you're wondering, because I'm only saying mixed shvachi before. There's a lot more where that comes from. So I deal with a lot of what we call Tinei Kashanishbu that don't even know what Shabbos or Kashrus is and so on. And they ask very challenging questions. A lot of things you take for granted, for them it's a surprise. And so I remember one guy once in a class, he was a very funny guy. He always asked these humorous, cynical questions. So one day I remember the class was Upper West Side. He raises his hand. Let me ask you something. I say, you've been talking about spirituality and ruchnius and godliness in the last hour. Beautiful. But why is it whatever shul I go to, I don't hear any ruchnius. I see a lot of food. Every holiday is celebrated with food. And he started listing it all. He said, Rosh Hashanah is a maisa with sweet foods. Honey cake or apple and honey. He says, and then comes Chanukah's latkes and Shavuos is blintzes. And Purim is kreplach, and of course Pesach has all its special delicacies. And even Yom Kippur, he says, so obsessed by not eating. And then you make sure to eat double on every Yom Kippur, just in case you don't die from hunger. So what's this thing with food? How spiritual is that? That was his question. How would you answer that? Talmud Chacham?
In Kemach and Torah.
I love it.
All right.
Gewaldig.
Double dessert for you.
Right.
It's not Pashup Shah.
But what happens if you forget the Torah and you only remember the Kamach? What happens?
You got to be reminded by someone like you.
So that's why we're here, yeah. And then Kamach and Torah, yeah, that's very good.
Tremendous. All right.
Better than winning the Powerball.
You mean Torah and Kala.
Speak for yourself.
Right? It works both ways.
So what's the answer, really?
So the Baal Shem Tov is a beautiful moshel. The moshel of a melech, the king, who's aging and ailing, and he wants his son to be the heir to the throne. But his son, he realized, is a spoiled brat. He grew up in the palace. He was always taken care of. He never earned one day of anything. So how is he going to be a sensitive leader? He's going to, he doesn't understand he's not going to have empathy to what people struggle with in the different towns and cities. So he decides to make a painful decision that he's going to send his son to a distant city in the empire where he has to earn his way. And of course, the father doesn't want to do it, but he feels that's the way he will learn and he will become sensitive to the subjects that he will one day lead. But the king knows full well that once the son goes off, he may forget where he comes from. And so he says, I'll send him a letter several times a year to remind him that you're the Ben Melech, and you're being groomed to be a leader one day. Never forget why you're there. Okay, and the day comes, he calls the son and he says, it's a very sad day for me, but I have to send you away. Because I want you to be a really mature and sensitive leader. But remember, I'm going to send you a letter. I'll remind you from time to time. So that's what happens. He goes off on his journey, settles in. Obviously, the first days are not easy. First months are not easy till he realizes no one's coming to save him. He has to protect himself. And what happens exactly as the king predicted? He forgets. And he becomes one of the Elam Keminogin. He's now one of the guys. But then one day a letter arrives, a special delivery letter from the king, dear son, I'm reminding you who I am, or who you are, and why you're there. So of course, now that he remembers that, he wants to dance, he wants to celebrate, simcha. But what's he supposed to do? He's living among the townspeople. They know him as a regular shmo, like them. What's he going to tell them? I'm going to be your king one day. They may be resentful and they'll be angry even. They may hurt him. Or they may think he's just crazy. So he has a great idea. He goes and throws a big kiddush. A big kiddush, free drinks, chont, kishke, kugel, knedlach. For some reason, a disproportionate amount of kosher food start with a K. You know? Whatever the reason is. Kartoffel. Huh?
It's kosher cake.
Right? Yeah. And the town is celebrating. Great, they got free food. Of course we celebrate. And meanwhile, he's dancing with them because he got the letter from his king, from the king. So Baal Shem Tov says, the nimshal, what's the nimshal? The king, of course, is Melech Malcham Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God, our king. The child is the neshama. And neshama in Gan Eden is spoiled. What is a neshama in Gan Eden? It doesn't have to struggle with anything. It's nana miziva shchina, can learn Torah all day. There's no health issues. There's no parnos issues. There's no anxieties. There's no therapists. There's no neurosis. It's animal bliss, so to speak. So that's not, the Eibishter wants that the neshama should earn its way. So it throws it down into this world. It's called Yeridas HaNeshama Beguf. It's a dark world, a hostile world. And as a matter of fact, even though Malam Dinese Kol HaTeira Kula, to give the neshama strength, but then Meshakin, Malach comes and makes us forget. So when the baby emerges, the Gemara says, the reason we have a cleft over our upper lip is because the Malach says, shh. And we're made to forget. The Alter Rebbe explains why were we made to forget. Why were we taught in the first place? He says, no, you didn't really forget. You forget consciously. But in your unconscious, you always retain, in your DNA, so to speak, an neshama remembers. And when it starts learning, it says, that's what I learned. It's like it resonates. So we're made to forget. We're living in this world, in this town, and we have to earn our way. And here, neshamas are not respected. Here, you're not going to get catered to and taken care of. You have to earn your way. You have to fight. You have to fight with others. You have to fight with your nefesh habamis. All the challenges of life. But Hashem, the King, knows that because we forget, it's very easy for us to just assimilate and become part of this world and forget that we are neshama, chelik elikam al mamish. So he sends us a letter several times a year. What's the letter? The letter is Shabbos and Yontif. And he says, here, I'm reminding you where you come from. That's what Shabbos is Hashem. And all the other Yom Tevim is Kadosh Yisrael Vazmanim. This is all days of Gedusha, Yom Tov, to remember. But the problem is, the soul is happy to receive the letter, but there's a guf and a nefesh habamis. We have a body and an animal soul. And the animal soul and the body are not interested in letters from God or from divine messages. So throw a kiddush. Feed the nefesh habamis. Give it good food. Let it sleep a little extra. With kishke and kugel and all the cholent, everything that you want. Every possible thing. So the nefesh habamis is happy. It's getting fed. So it's not going to disturb the simcha. And meanwhile, the neshama can celebrate for the real reason we have Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's the most. However, before the l'chaim, just one final line. What happens if all we remember is the nefesh habamis being satisfied and we forget about the letter? That's the question. So listen, look at our Shabbosim and Yomim Tevim. Everybody looks forward, I'm sure. You get a little rest. You get good food and all the different things. But are we celebrating the letter? And that means that every Shabbos is a new letter. Most Shabbosim by us are pretty much what's called mitzvahs hanoshim ulamoda. Translate that for the Elam.
It's habitual.
Habitual, routine. Mechanical Judaism. Robotic.
Not ours, right?
Why, is it no food? So we're here at a Farbrengen to remember, and this is Rosh Chodesh Shevat, as Hazman Eser Sheshalei, but we wake each other up. So by all means, with the animal soul, feast away, fresh away, But at least let's give equal time to the neshama. So that's why we're here, my friends. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim.
It's not empty. Well, let's see what we say on Shabbos. Let's see what we say on Shabbos.
Shabbos, let your...
I have an easier commute on Shabbos.
No, a nigga. For sure. Yossi, what's your favorite nigga? The letter or the animal song? Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, bam, 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 bam. Even when you tell the story, they forget. What? No. I watched you. I already. It fills me up.
Sorry? No.
Would you be interested in a guy every week?
I'm not really a Tanya guy.
I came for you. Seltzer, if you have seltzer. Oh, there, the seltzer. Yeah. Thank you.
You want triple berry or you want lemon?
I'll ask my animal soul. I'll let you know in a minute.
Good for you.
Meanwhile, I'll do this. La, yeah, you know. Yeah. Yum ba dum bum ba yeah. I cocaine man yum gaira leno. Put my hand on the L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. I think what I said is enough. Mu'at machzor kamaruba. We don't need to belabor it, right?
Keep going. We're here. We're in the zone. All right. Why is your shot?
I remember the Rebbe once said. I remember the Rebbe once said out of Farbrengen. The Rebbe was speaking like for hours, and very passionate and very impassioned, all that. And then he stopped suddenly and he said, he said, "Ten lechochem v'yechkem oid." Was sich gesagt, Basi hat nicht geholfen, weiter sagen wird sicher nicht. So it comes a point.
That's a good word. I like that.
Yeah.
Better get it. Better get it.
For sure. You understand what I said, yeah?
Yeah. My father used to speak to me in English only.
Mama Lush is your first language?
No.
I thought, for all I know, I think you start pouring out Ungarish or Yiddish from Satmar or something, no?
Harry, I miss you. Where you been last few weeks?
Yeah, thank you so much. I haven't seen you since you dropped that off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't know you trust me alone with your wife in the house, huh?
לפי איפן המקבל. לפי איפן הכלים המקבל.
I went to Cash 2 weeks ago.
What's that? Happy Clappy?
Yeah, Clappy. That's and then last week I went to
L'chaim Yossi, L'chaim. Hey Shvat is your mother's yahrzeit. First yahrzeit? Hey Shvat. What's your mother's full name? First full name? Miriam? This week's Pashas. Miriam. Who is she named after? Doesn't matter, it's fine. We have equal treatment to everybody. Very few people come back from there. Very few are real about how far back. Very few. My father's mother goes all the way to the Alter Rebbe. But that's ain't secret. Gershon Ber Pahara. My father's named after Gershon Ber Pahara. And his grandfather was Abba the Freiliche, the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus. There are. Alle zijn zugekommen. Alle zijn zugekommen. He writes to George Rohr that there's no such thing as a beginner. Beginners. I do a lot of work with people, basically like a type of bridge between psychology and spirituality. I grew up in the world of Chassidus, Tanya, of course, but more than just Tanya, all the Maimorim and more than you probably could even imagine. There's thousands and thousands of pages of what some people would call Hasidic teachings. You can call them mystical teachings, spiritual teachings. But when you learn to decipher it and understand it, it's profoundly psychological. It really talks about essentially what makes us tick. So I deal sometimes with the more, let's call it the kanoim among us. Say to me, what's the psychology you talk about? The Schwarz Jahr, this is like, Sheil Tacht, you're using Goyish concepts. So I decided that to look up psychology is a translation for study of the soul. Logy is study, and psych is the soul in ancient Greek or Latin. So I remember I was giving Farbrengen for these kanoim, and I said, I want to talk about the study of the soul. They said, finally! Not study all the psychology stuff. Do you remember a guy in Montreal, his name was Shore? the guys in Zalmanshore. So he was one of these old Chassidus Yidden, the old timers. I remember I was once in Montreal. I came to shul Friday night. He came yelling at me. He says, "What's the in Yiddish?" I said, "What's the reingeschleppt alles schön tachtus in Chassidus, spirituality, psychology?" You know, he said. So I said, "Rab Zalman, das ist Ruchnius und das ist Neshama Sach." Nein. Das ist psychology. Das ist Schalsklippes hat mehr. You understand why? Because they're purists. You know, they know the language. But the truth is that the Torah is deeply psychological. And Faket, whenever I say the opposite. You think Freud is the father of psychology? Torah is the father of psychology. God created the world and he created the human psyche. So who better knows how the psyche works than the Eibishter? You say, Stakel bar Isa bar Alma. You look in Torah. The problem is we don't know how to translate it from Torah. You read Torah, you don't see it necessarily. That's why you need someone to teach it. But the truth is, the Torah is what we call the Medrash says, a blueprint for life. It says like an architect looks into a blueprint. The Eibishter looked into a blueprint. So who's the blueprint? No psychologist and no psychiatrist and no doctor can tell you what your soul looks like. It's guesswork. Now, I'm not saying it's all guess that they have developed some systems, but the Torah tells us a picture. God's telling you a snapshot, like an X-ray of your soul. A doctor can take an X-ray of your body. And I think when you come to recognize this, which is really the essence of what Chassidus is, you realize it's not just optional, it's actually revolutionary. Now, so some people say, so why wasn't Chassidus taught thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, only since the Baal Shem Tov, just a few hundred years? Because there was a time we lived in an insulated and a very immunized world. You lived in a shtetl, you had no other exposure. There were no mobile phones. B'chlal, you couldn't even interact with Goyim. They didn't want you. So there's a certain innocence and purity, a taras HaKedesh, that you could pick up a certain Yerushalayim just from the smell of the chicken soup in your grandmother's kitchen. Today, that's not the case. There are a lot of other smells out there. There's a lot of other influences. And today, we know there's not even ghetto walls can't even help, because this has everything. And everybody understands what that means on all levels. So today, you have to articulate it. You can't rely that you're going to grow up in a pure environment and it's going to protect you. So I do really a lot of work in this area, because I really believe that if we can create a Torah psychological model, it'll be better than all the models out there, whether Freudian or Frankl or Adler or all the different psychological schools of thoughts. I deal with psychologists. There's a professor, the head of psychology department in Stony Brook, called me. She's Israeli originally. Her name is Orly Calderon. She was a secular Jew when she started her journey. As a matter of fact, anti-religious. And one day she called me, she said, I've been reading your book, and I want you to know, I'm the head of the psychology department here in Stony Brook. I'm not sure if she's still doing that, but that was when she called me. And she said, these were her words. She says, where psychology ends, Chassidus begins. So she wants to collaborate with me. She wants to bring up psychological things and say, what would Torah say about it? What would Chassidus? So I told her earlier, I have a better idea. Instead of looking at it as two different schools, why don't we collaborate and create one bigger model that takes the best of all worlds? There are things you know, Chochmah B'goyim Tamim, things that the scientific world has developed methods and so on. And then there's deeper insights into Torah. So we began working, just time didn't allow for it, but it was very fascinating. I found it extremely enlightening, because you see things like, I'll give one example. Even from this week's Parshas, but I'll start with an example from a few weeks ago. Story of Yosef. One of the most amazing stories. Yosef is sold by his brothers into slavery. 22 years, he's ripped away from his father. So you can imagine you were that person. Your brothers took you and almost killed you, and then they turned you became a slave, ended up in Egypt. Your father thinks you're dead, etc. What would happen when you meet your brothers? You'd have so much anger, so much trauma. You probably would have gone to a lot of therapy over the years. And what happens when Yosef meets the brothers? The brothers are embarrassed, terrible. They can't bury themselves. They're burying themselves in shame. And Yosef says, "You didn't do this to me. It's lemichya. The Eibishter sent me here to save you and our family." And it's a real story. What kind of presence of mind, what kind of self-control does that take? So most of us say, okay, Yosef is a tzaddik. A tzaddik can do that. But the truth is, it's a lesson in life. It's a tremendous lesson. Almost all psychology deals with this challenge. What do you do with grievances? Let's say you were abused by a parent. God forbid. Let's say we were abused by the Nazis. We have a lot of anger in us. How do you deal with your anger? Do you have vengeance that you want to get even? Do you live the rest of your life bitter and angry and negative? That's what happens to many of us. The traumas of our lives shape us. Many of us are fearful, insecure, angry. Every vice. Every one of you, believe it or not, were once little children. Even Yossi Pop was once a little baby running around, innocent, pure, hevel shein beichet. The best model, if you want to, when you buy, let's say, a cell phone, so there they say version 11 is better than a version 10, and a version 10 is better than a version 9. But when it comes to human life, version 1.0, as soon as you were born, is the best version. After that is downhill. Because you start assuming your attitudes from your parents, and from educators, and then media, and society. How much of your personality right now is defined by others in your life? Either demands and expectations from the people around you, or when you were a child. We're no longer that pure, freshly fallen snow, so to speak, that innocent child. So if you really want to see the best of you, study a child. A child is the best and healthiest version of who you are. So Yosef, what he was able to do, it wasn't just he was a tzaddik and he swallowed his pride and forgave them. He was able to realize that what happens to you in your life does not define you. He was not going to allow himself to be defined by his brother's behavior. So we suffer, but we don't become sufferers. As I deal with people, it's always the issue. You become defined by your experiences. And you say to someone, no, you are an neshama. Neshama shenasate b'tahedihi. I remember I was once talking to Rav Meir Sharim, a real kanoi. He needed something from me. So I said to him, let me ask you a question. And everyone that's not exactly the length of his payas is a goy, basically. Like that. So, which of course is a total distortion. There's a Talmud Chacham also. But it just doesn't misses, you can know, what do they say? The price of everything, but the value of nothing. You can read all, I don't want to quote B'Shem Emre, but the same guy also said that people know more and more, read more and more today about less and less. So just because you know a lot of book knowledge doesn't mean you have any seichel. A computer also has a lot of book knowledge, doesn't have any seichel. So I said to him, let me ask you a question, Kfeid Harav. In Yiddish, I said to him, tell me, when one of the Jews that's a Chiloni, he dismissed Chilonim. They're Shoyim and Peishi Yisrael, the whole thing. Tziyenim. So I said, let me ask you, if one of them decides one morning, he's a Pesach, I need a Psak Halach. He decides he wants to start davening tomorrow morning. He says, they'll never daven. First, that's what he said. But I said, that he wants to say Tefillah in the morning. And he comes to you as a Pesach. Should he say Neshama Shenasate B'Tahedihi or not? I just want to know what your psak is. So he looks at me, says, no one ever asked such a shayla by me. And of course, you know yourself, of course he has to say it. So he says, he's saying a emes or a sheker? He can't say a sheker. So I remember he looked at me, he says, you're a smart aleck. So I said, so 1 second, the Teda says he should say Tahedahi. So what are you telling me stories that they're worse than animals? How could you say that? So obviously he doesn't even have an answer for that because he never thought about it. He could tell you more about a Chatzi Shir and whether you Chayiv Skila, Chenek, Hereg, or the Dal Mrs. Bezdin, that he knows more about than he knows what a Neshama is. He doesn't know what a Neshama is. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm not saying it with a name, but there's a lot of Jews like this, unfortunately. I, thank God, grew up and understand Neshama is the bottom line. You are a Neshama. You're not your life experiences. That's what Yosef knew. He's a Neshama sent to the world by God. And this world is Kol HaDrachim B'Cheskas Sakana, and he suffered greatly. But that doesn't define him. What defines him is a Neshama, so he would never take it out on his brothers. Not that he overlooked what they did. They were chayiv. Look later what happens with Asari Arugi Malchus. They ended up being punished for it, even though it was by a Rosh Gomer. But they did something wrong. Yosef was not an Amoritz. He knew they did something wrong, but it doesn't define me. You're not going to define my life. It's such a profound psychological idea. I remember shared with her and with others. And I say, tell me a psychologist, where do you have such a vadois, such a certainty that a person is not defined by their experience? No secular psychologist can say that with certainty. The only one that can say that with certainty is Torah, that you created b'tselem Elokim, and that defines you. Not your Yetzer Hara, not your Nefesh Habamitz, not your negative. That doesn't mean you're not accountable. We're not saying you're not accountable, but it doesn't define you. You're not defined.
I think it was his emunah that carried him through. It wasn't that he was fighting psychology. I mean, he knew already throughout all the years.
But what do you think Amunah is? It's also a koyach within you.
But if you really are a mom and you really have Amunah, you can't be angry at the brothers.
No, why? Because the Eibishter's leading.
Because it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu the one.
Okay, so I'm putting it in different aces, because the Eibishter is running your life, and not they.
Yeah, that's the problem.
It's the same thing what I just said.
No, I'm saying we all wouldn't have problems if we believed that firmly.
That's the point he's trying to make.
Exactly. I'll tell you something more. You can be taught. I can assure you can be taught. We're not going to be Yosef, but you can be taught to do that. It's every trauma anybody experiences. What do you think every therapist is trying to do? A good therapist. They're trying to free you from not being defined by your experiences. So somewhat you have some ability to not be shaped by it. That's what they're all trying to do. And yes, Amunah B'Hashem.
But they're not doing it through the route of Amunah. It's for us, the greatest crutch is
with respect, good therapists actually do it. They just don't use those words. They find other words. Yeah. For whatever reason, because they're separation of church and state, whatever the reason. But the point I'm making here, the point I want to make is that there's tremendous lessons that we ourselves are not aware. Look, you want to start with a bang? I don't know about a bang, but I'll talk about... I really don't like to talk about this, especially with Shemrei Torah mitzvahs like yourselves and Yerushalayim, and you all know that you're on the highest level, of course, right? And the Eibishter's...
I should leave.
I'm starting to believe it.
Okay.
You should believe it.
Just keep your sense of humor. Just all. That's what I would say. The fact of the matter is, the frum world suffers from enough psychological problems that's comparable to the secular world. And I always tell people that a dysfunctional religious person is worse than a dysfunctional non-religious person. You know why? Because they hide behind religion. They have the way they're seared a vision of what God is and what Torah and mitzvahs are. The story about the guy that was sitting at a Shabbos table. There were guests at the table. And I told it last time, I don't even remember. You know the story?
No.
Oh, you're nodding like as if... Yeah. And there was a bunch of guests at the table, and the husband, the father, the head of the table, he's like a big Yerushalayim, the ganze Shemaine Begadim and everything. And his wife is a very obedient and devout Rebbetzin. In the back, she's not getting all the coverage, she's doing all the work in the back end, so to speak. And for some reason, she forgot to cover the Khalas. It's a Challah dekel. And the husband was visibly angry and upset about it. And he, in front of guests, in front of the family, he began to berate her in the ways that were humiliated her. He did it in a way everyone saw it. He was very embarrassed. Now, why this schmuck didn't get up? Go get this Khala Tichli yourself. What is she? She's your Evet Kanani? What is this? Al Kaponim. After they washed, they sat down at the table. So one of the guests, they thought the guests were all Amaratzim, they don't know what's going on. So one of the guests, like he's like as if he's a completely ignorant, he says, I noticed that you were very visibly upset about the Khalas not being covered. Why do Khalas have to be covered? What it's something bad about them? He says, no, there's the wine, not to embarrass the Challah. You cover the challah. So he says to him, so embarrassing your wife is less important than embarrassing an inanimate challah? Is that what you're telling me? And the guy, of course, was quite embarrassed, rightfully so. This is what Ramban calls a novel b'reshus HaTorah. A novel. And he's dressing it up in religion. I deal with a lot of couple counseling, from couples too. She's not religious enough for me. My wife is not religious enough. Not covering her hair, with dresses this way, or the other way around. He's not religious enough. That's what usually. So I always say, and it usually shocks, especially from people, I said, my whole history of my life and every experience I have, everything I know about Torah, I never saw that religion should be an issue that comes between ish v'ishtei. If religion is between husband and wife, that means there's a bigger problem. It's not the religion. There's some problem between the two of you. And people right away say, what do you mean? The Torah says to do this, my wife doesn't want to do it, or the other way around. My husband doesn't want to do it. So I said, well, there's a Rambam, the end of Hilchos Chanukah, where he asks, where he talks in Halacha, a question, if you have only enough money, Shabbos Chanukah, and you only have enough money for one candle, do you light a Shabbos candle or a Chanukah candle? It's different bracha. So you would think Chanukah takes precedence because it's once a year. Shabbos is every week. No. Right? Chanukah is Persum and Nisa. Shabbos is Shalom Bayis. And Shalom Bayis trumps, can I use that word?
Yeah.
It's just a joke. So Shabbos trumps Chanukah, and therefore, and then the Rambam continues. It doesn't stop with that.
Shalom Bayis is the biggest person in
No, one second. We'll get to that. One second. And the Rambam continues. What does he quote? The Gemara. The why by Meseta, the din of a Seta. So how do you prove that she's innocent? The Eibusher says, take my name. Yimcha Shmi. Kedei Lasa Shalom ben Ish ve'ishtei. Well, the Eibusher couldn't find another way to make sure that the woman is innocent.
Is that important?
Exactly, because he wants to show to save a husband and a wife. Take my name, and we all know Yimcha Shmi is one of the Seres HaDibros. It's not a simple thing to raise God's name. So every time I say this, Fruma Jews look at me and they say, "No." I said, "This is a Rambam. This is halacha. It's not my progressive liberal thinking here." So what's the point? People misunderstand the whole yesod of Torah. Shalom Bayis is the biggest mitzvah of all. If you don't have Shalom Bayis, you don't have a bias. If you don't have a bias, how are you going to keep Shabbos and Kashrus? You're going to have children that are going to be Shem Torah mitzvahs that are broken home. It's ridiculous. My point that I'm saying is that there's so much, I'm calling it psychological wisdom. I hope you guys don't have a problem with any bias against the word psychology. No? Good. Okay. We're good.
Now that I know it means soul.
Chachmas HaNefesh.
Now that I know it means soul.
Yeah. That when you start learning this, it can change your life. And I think the frum world, we're coming to Yud Shvat, as I said. And I like to be practical. I'm not going to talk here just abstract ideas. The frum world does not understand the treasure that Torah Chassidus offers, which is really Torah, but revealing the so-called the depth of Torah in human relations. So we learn Torah. Look, you go to a shul on Shabbos. I don't know what's going on these days, but we all grew up with this. There's always the 1 or 2, 3 or 10 people that are yelling at the balkeda and correcting every word. As I was a child, and I was a natural skeptic. As I was a child, I used to laugh at it. And I used to tell my father, some shugas, what are these people nuts? Like OCD. And so let's say the balkeda said it wrong, big thing, what happens? But this is their thing, and they wait all week preparing to make sure they can attack the balkeda.
They're very liberal types.
Now, I'm not laughing. I know that many Jews mean well. There's nothing malicious about it. But I'll tell you where it gets disturbing. This is where Chatosi ani maskir, okay? It's got a little confession time. It disturbed me to the extent that I started seeing, I grew up in the frum world. I grew up in Crown Heights. I grew up in Chabad, but I know the frum world well. Even my own community. And I started seeing this inconsistency. I saw people, mahader in Chvezvas Adigdor Kal, when it comes to pure menschlichkeit, they don't have menschlichkeit. It never made sense to me as a child. I remember when I used to ask the question, some people would say to me, sekricht avorim, you know that expression? That means something the matter with me. Why don't you know? Everybody accepts that. But it didn't make sense to me. I remember through my yeshiva years, I can't remember once that we had a malamed, a rebbe, a teacher, or somebody that talked to us about being mentioned, that addressed bullying, anger, jealousy, things that all kids go through. The only one I remember, that till this day I remember, is Rabbi Ushpa. Rabbi Ushpa, remember Rabbi Ushpa? Such a refined person. I remember once he gave a talk to us about being clean, cleanliness. I didn't talk about this last Farbrengen. Okay, I must have confessed other sins then. Okay.
I wasn't here, so it's only.
No. I did. I just was testing whether you guys even listened. Okay, fine. It's all right. It's not the first time I repeat myself. So Like, like women say, that a guy comes home from college and he tells his wife, he says, I read today that women, on average, speak twice as much as men every day. Like men speak 20,000 words a day, women speak 40,000 words. She says, yeah, because we have to repeat ourselves to our men all the time. Anyway, okay, fine. Is that true?
My wife would agree.
Yeah. So, so I remember seeing these things and it would make me crazy. Rabbi Ushbal, I remember, gave us a talk about being clean. Being clean, a person. So I remember afterwards I went over to him and said, why do we have to be clean? I remember he said, the nails should always be clean.
Next to God.
So he said, because Mamlech is Kainim v'gei Kodesh. And he meant it. He wasn't saying some type of cliche. And I remember he said it with such I remember it till the day. We're talking now 50 years ago. My point is that there's some, the word dissonance? Dissonance? A disconnect, a pirud, between a lot of the mitzvahs we do, very much mechanical, as we said, and we lose the human touch. I mean, how many people grew up in homes where the parents were very frum and everything was medagdik, but there was no love in the home. You didn't feel care. There we go. You're like the guy once in the audience. Every problem I mentioned, he was him. You have all the above. All the above. Yeah, that's what it is.
Check. We all do. He's the only one who wants to admit it.
It reminds me, I was in, what was the restaurant on the Upper West Side? I forgot what it was called. Anyway, I came to, not the very, another one. Closed later. Huh? Fleischig. He gets it now 0 down to filtering.
The tape of the Rabbi in there. What's going on?
No, not the Mashiach one. He's closed. That's another. Deli Cosmo. No, it was not Cosmo. You'll know the name if I remember. I forgot what it's called. Who owned it?
Abigail.
Levana.
Levana. Okay.
Levana. There was a different name. Anyway, I come there to meet somebody, and what's going on? Speed dating. Speed dating. Aisha Torah had speed dating. So they have a bunch of tables where the women sit. They're numbered like horses. They can put numbers on them. And then the guys line up, and they spend, and there's its own rest of the bell. They have like 2 minutes. They move from table to table. So I just found it. I went to the back. We ate in the back. Come back. I came after it was over. So I said, "What happened?" She said, "None of the men were interested in the women. There was one guy who wanted to go out with every woman. That was the thing. That's reminded me. None of the horses and the money." Anyway, getting back to what I was saying, so it always disturbed me. There's dissonance. And I'll be very honest, it was what Chassidus saved my life, because I'm by nature a skeptic, and I would have not stayed in the system. There's no way I would have stayed. It was too fake to me. It was like not real. I had a lot of good Jews. I wasn't abused. I wasn't molested. I got all the disclaimers. So I don't have any anger. Like I tell people, I wasn't disappointed because I never had expectations. So you don't get disappointed when you don't have expectations. But I realized this dissonance was so deep. And to be perfectly honest, I remember the first times I heard actually a Maimer Basi Legani from the Rebbe. It was Tov Shalom Adalet. It was 1974. At that point, I was 16, 17 years old. And it changed my life. Not just the one Maimer. I realized, 1 second, there's a whole part of Torah that talks about the neshama. It talks about a personality. It talks about birur hamidus. That you refine your human behavior. You don't just do mitzvahs, actions, and robotic acts, and then you can behave like an animal. That's not acceptable. And that Yiddishkeit is all about that element of being a refined human being. So I see, we stood up before we were dancing. When I see Jews dancing, to me what I see is that we're going back in a certain way to that pure child that we all have. And what has happened to us? How many of us live in fear? I don't mean fear, trembling fear. Fears of being accepted. What is someone going to say? Are we going to please somebody? You ask a person, tell me, who are you? Most intelligent person is going to tell you, who am I? I don't really know who I am. For all I know, maybe I'm a product of my parents and their expectations of me. Maybe a product of other society. Maybe I'm serving my clients or serving my employer or whatever it may be. The idea of really discovering self is not easy because we are influenced. I know and nobody likes to be called a conformist. And I've spoken to many audiences, and I say, how many conformists out there? Nobody raises their hand because nobody wants to be called a conformist. So in other words, everybody's a pioneer. Everybody's a revolutionary. So why does the Shulchan Aruch have to begin Al Yevish Mipnei Amaligim? That's the first thing in the Shulchan Aruch. Because we are nispal from others. And just in case you're worried about that aspect, Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai, on his deathbed, the Gemara says, what did he tell his students? He says, Halavai, Shehelachem, Meir Shamayim, Kameir Basar V'Dam. This is Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai speaking to Tanoim, not the peasants like us. That they should, Halavai, you should fear God as much as you fear people. If we knew that God was right in front of us and like someone's watching you, the whole picture would be different. So the fact of the matter is that the good news is that Magdim Refuah Lamaka, that the Baal Shem Tov came, and then the Maggid of Mizrich, and then the Alter Rebbe, and all the Rabbeim, and I, of course, I knew my Rebbe, our Rebbe, we're here at his oil right now, and what the bottom line, what they taught was that Yiddishkeit and Torah is meant to be bepnimius, meant to change your life, meant to make you a mensch, not just do mitzvahs blindly, and do everything by the letter of the law, but miss the whole spirit of it. Now, I'm not trying to dismiss. Listen, there's an inyan of Shalei Lishma, Baal Lishma, and we all know that a lot of mitzvahs you can do. A kavan is not liikuva, but it's not the same thing. And how many of our own children, whether you know it or not, are picking up on that? What do you think? They may not understand it consciously, but they see when there's inconsistency. You tell your child, listen, I want you to come to the minyan with me and do this, and then they see you talk to your wife in a disrespectful way. What do you think is the message exactly? You think they're sophisticated to understand that that really your standards are the davening, but you can behave like I said before with the challah. I'm sure most people don't do that here. Like that comedian that said, yes, they cover the challah, not to embarrass the challah, and then what do? They wash, and then they stick a knife in its heart. So we have to remember, you have to have a little lightness of spirit here. So I believe there's a revolution underway, and I think every one of you and every one of us is responsible. Most of you, I'm not sure what you do with your lives. I'm sure you're running businesses. I'm sure you're responsible adults and trying to take care of your families. I'm assuming Chol Yisrael b'cheskus kashrus. But I want to tell you, there's something else that you must be, and this is not. I'm not preaching. I'm sharing it out of love. You are Mamleches Kain V'Gei Kodesh. You're blessed to be a neshama that Hashem sent to this world. Like I said before, the moshel. You came to this world not just to take care of yourself and your family and make a parnasa. That's beautiful. You came to this world to bring light to others, to be a giver and not a taker, to illuminate the corner of your world. And from my point of view, any Farbrengen like this has to come away with one important question. Are you doing that or not? They say in the Gemara says that a business has to make a profit. If you come out as much as you entered, that's not called zavin tagri. It has to make a profit. So the same thing Chassidus says is also with our Veda. If you leave this world like you came in, many people would be very happy with that. At least they didn't go backwards. But that's not enough. That's not why your neshama came to this world. Your neshama came that you make a mark with your unique skills and abilities in some way. And everybody has a sphere of influence. So I would be amiss not to say this, because this is what I heard from my Rebbe. Right here, a picture of the Rebbe. Literally day after day after day. It's what drives my life. And it's not an achrayus as in some type of yoke, responsibility, you do something. It's actually very gratifying, because it brings the best out of you. You want to discover yourself? So the Eibishter already said to the first Id, Avram Avinu, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, aladatcha beis avicha. You got to get out of your comfort zone. I look at you. I think you have a very nice comfort zone. I don't know. That's a wild guess. Yeah. I look at myself. I also have a nice comfort zone. We all have comfort zones. And comfort zones are very compelling. That's why they're called comfort zones. But that's not why the neshama was ripped away from its comfort zone in Gan Eden to be comfortable down here. That was not its kavanah. There's machlekes between Shammai and Hillel. Nuach la'adam shenivra, shalei nivra. And in this instant, the halach is like Shammai. It's one of the rare instances Shammai says it's more pleasant not to be born. Hillel says it's more pleasant to be born because of Torah mitzvahs. Shammai says it's not, because the world is a very dark world and a very difficult world. The halacha is like Shammai, and there's halachic reasons. That's why we say, for example, Shalei Asani Isha. Why don't we say Shasani Ish? So the Yerushalmi says, because you can't say a bracha on something that Nuach la'adam Shalei Nivra. So you have to say it in the negative. Okay. So the question then is, so why were we born? If the halacha is like Shammai, so why were we born? Well, the Eibishter follows halacha. Why did Neshamas come to this world? So the Alter Rebbe says, he says, Nuach la'adam Shalei Nivra. It's more pleasant not to be born, but it's more meaningful to be born. Who says we're coming to this world for pleasantness? Now Hashem, let me make it clear, Hashem should bless everyone, should have a pleasant life, a healthy life, an easy life. That's the Torah says that. You'll have a good life. But that's not the purpose of your life. The purpose of your life is to do something that only you can accomplish. When I heard that completely triggered something that changed my whole, because I said, that's a Jew. A Jew is not someone just medagdik and digdu kal shel divrei sofrim. A Jew is someone that came as an agent of God's in this world to change the world. That resonated with me. I liked the idea of a revolution. Then I realized Avram Avinu was a conformist. He was the mamash the opposite. He was the only one that defied the whole world. Everybody were pagans. His father was an idol manufacturer. He could have been very successful and wealthy and not do anything. But he was not looking for comfort. He was looking for purpose. And he defied the world, and he became the biggest pioneer of all. Moshe Rabbeinu was an outsider. The Ziknei Yisrael didn't even like him. He was an establishment. He didn't grow up and he didn't went to all the fancy yeshivas. He was an outsider. He lived in Pare's house. He was a stranger. He married a Kushi, a dark woman, etc. So then I said to myself, I remember thinking, one second, all the leaders of the Jewish people in the beginning of history were all revolutionaries. Where are revolutionaries today? If Avram and Moshe Rabbeinu came to a regular shul today, in the Five Towns, or in Crown Heights, or in Williamsburg, or in Borough Park, or in the other Arei HaKadosh, Muncie and Lakewood and Tom's River, what are the other? Teaneck Arei HaKadosh, right? Once you have a smokehouse, you become a holy city, right? Yeah, so if Moshe and Avram Avinu wandered into one of these shuls, would he be comfortable? Would he feel, this is my place? Good question, right? I'm sure there's certain technical things he would be comfortable with, but the pioneering spirit. Unfortunately today, I see this all the time. I see my own nephews, I see the passions that most Jews use today is not in Yiddishkeit. Passion goes into business. That's what passion is. And maybe a little in relationships and sexuality, if you wish. But passion in Yiddishkeit, I'd like to see how many people you see that their biggest passion, their biggest chayas is in Yiddishkeit, in spreading elokus, in spreading godliness, a message. By me, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was like that. That's what made him so unique. Now, you'll say, one second, what about all the Rosh Yeshivas are passionate in their learning? I'm not taking away from that. But that is their so-called, that's their vocation, is learning. And that's their world. But passionate about, we're going to bring Mashiach, passionate, we're going to change the world, like Avram Avinu went. Wherever he went, he spread godliness. That type of approach, that nothing stands in the way and you do whatever it takes. So, I hope some of the words I'm saying are taking the right intention, that's what we are meant to be. We are here to be proactive Jews. I'm not saying quit your jobs and don't sell cell phones on Amazon or whatever ways that others are making money. But also maybe reserve a little passion for creating some, let's call it spiritual revolution. That's not usually the words you hear in the yeshiva world, spiritual revolution. But that is a driving force. And I think in 70 years from Yud Shvat, Tovshin Aleph, the Rebbe said then the Maimer Basi Legani. And he said these words. He said that just as Moshe Rabbeinu, the Medrash says, that when the world was created, the Shechina, godliness was on earth. Gan Eden. It's a godly place. When Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge, so the Shechina was nostalgic, it says, from Aretz to Rekiya Harishon. Then the next generation of Avedis was Kiyah Sheni. 7 generations. I know the Mishnah says 10 generations, but generally 7 generations. And then we know what happened. The Mabul came. Who reversed the process? Avram Avinu. So the Medrash continues and says, Avram brought it from the Kiyah Shvi to the Kiyah Shishi, Yitzchak to the Kiyah Chamishi, and Moshe, the seventh generation, brought it to Shachanti B'Sechem.
Women want to know if they can come in.
Which women?
The people from the neighborhood.
If they're ready to clean up and cover our Khalas, maybe, yeah. You can do whatever you want. That's
Now you got to change the whole topic.
Aaron, who's your butt?
The Derech Klal, women are more receptive to these messages than men, just for the
Single
record.
girls coming to dad.
Anyway, tell the women that they're going to distract the men. I'm not going to have your attention. Let me just finish my few words here.
No, you have to continue. They're coming.
Good, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, hold on.
So what did I say? Oh, and he said, Moshe Rabbeinu, what does it say? The Mikdash, the Mishkan, was the equivalent of what was by Gan Eden Mekedem, Shechina down below. And the Rebbe said the same thing now, that our generation is the seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe, who was a student of the Maggid, a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And our job, this is what he said in 1951, on Yud Shvat, 70 years ago. These are the words. Our job is to bring the Shekhinah down below, this time permanently. Moshe did it temporarily, and now permanently. And the whole Mashiach craze that you hear all started from that statement. That this generation would be the generation that would bring the Geula. Now, I'm sure you all understand this is not as radical as it sounds. Because anyone that learns Torah knows the whole purpose of creation is that the Geula should come, and we should see Elokus again in this world. Like it was in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, but then it was temporary, and now permanently. It's the basis of this, not the Chassidus Hergish, this is Torah. This is, you say this at Torah. The Ani Mamin, etc. You say this at Torah. So the Rebbe said, and now, after everything we went through, we're ready to do that. I find that to be extremely empowering, because it's a mission. Why were you born in this generation and not 70 years ago? Same with me. And where would we be 70 years ago? 80 years ago? Right, exactly. Why did Hashem choose our neshamas? You ever think about that? Why are we living in 2021 and not in the 1921 or 1821? Because Hashem, in His mysterious ways, chose you to be here. Because He believes in you and in me and all of us that we have a total vote of confidence to change this world. And if you need like das tachten, like derech hateva, and we have the capacity. You know, when Yeshaya Novi said, "Lo yorei v'lo yashchisu, ki mol haaretz deis Hashem kamayim liyam achasim," that world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. If you lived then, how was that possible? There was no technology. That would require a miracle, like a Matan Torah miracle, that the whole world heard the Hashem Ezlam Yitit. But today it's not a miracle. Molad Deis Hashem is completely naturally possible. You don't even have to spend billions of dollars. It's called technology. And the whole technology was created for this purpose. Like the Gemara, like the Mishnah Medrash says, the whole Zov, gold, was created for the Beis HaMikdash. But because of Bechira, the Eibush also said, I'm going to let you use it for other things. And God forbid, you could also use it for the Hepa, for Egel HaZov, for a golden calf. Technology was created in order to spread God's words. What does the prophet, the Novi say? That V'yemahu, they won't be reivim l'lechem, l'leitzmeim, l'mayim, el l'dvar Hashem. What is Dvar Hashem? That's our responsibility, to figure out what Dvar Hashem is and how you communicate it to others. Why I mention psychology, because I find that there's two ways to infiltrate the secular world with Dvar Hashem today. In a way, they'll be receptive. Come and tell them, hey, listen, we're going to tell you God's words from the Seres HaDibros. Some will listen, some won't listen. This country is officially built on those principles. But if you tell somebody, listen, I'm going to show you godliness through psychology, everybody wants to know, what makes me tick and so on. That's one avenue. Another avenue, which I find, is song, interestingly. Music and song is another way to people's hearts and souls, because music is, everybody likes music. In other words, even the Nefesh Habamis would respond through psychology and music. I'm not saying there aren't other ways, but there are plenty of ways to bring Dvar Hashem to the world. And that's our achrayus. So here's 70 years from Basi Legani. I say l'chaim to the Rebbe. I say l'chaim to all the Rabbeim. To all our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. They were Meisha Nefesh. They lived in very difficult times. They don't have our comforts. COVID is a challenge, but let's be honest, this doesn't come close to what are the Xeris and what we went through in the past. So, we have our issues, but so l'chaim, we stand on their shoulders, and they're watching us. They say, you were born and created in this generation. What are you doing with this gift? L'chaim, l'chaim.
Singing now, right?
Sing.
Mizmevar Shleim Kalbach. Mizmevar Shleim Kalbach. That's You agree?
Yeah.
Named after, just a few months after the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, this young man here. We have a Yosef Yitzchak among us.
I think we do.
Thursday night usually. Huh?
We do a quick Myra here. Daven. Sammy didn't daven, right? Shmuel.
Yeah.
You didn't daven yet, right?
I didn't understand what you said. The Medrash says it.
Yeah, hi, I'm returning the call.
Moshe.
You dialed me, so I'm just returning the call.
Let's do a quick Myra over here.
What happened?
Okay.
But don't they were there?
Oh, okay, maybe you...
I'm for sure we can.
Okay, no problem.
What?
Oscar, is that your name?
Listen, they had bigger challenges then, but they also had bigger neshamas.
Oscar.
And he got it at 5 o'clock this morning, right? So
What do you tell
I'm
people who
gonna
don't
have to
have
come back to the
oratory
my
skills
daughter
that you do?
and walk into the city and bring her back later tonight.
What do you
I have to
do?
go from
Very good question.
What's the...
then to Manhattan
How do you
and back.
spread the light? You're not a... What?
That's a good question. I like that question.
I tell you, that's why. And then you can go back to
What do you do?
It's a great question. I'll answer.
Okay.
He's asking me, he says, what happens if someone doesn't have oratory skills like me? So how do you spread Dvar Hashem?
one by one.
No, but you have to have some koyach hadibur to be able to even go one by one. I don't have the problem. I'm saying in general. What do you tell someone who does have the problem?
How many do you have?
No, it's not so simple because I teach sometimes Satmar guys. And they really love this. They love it. And I told them, the next time you're on a plane, this is before COVID, you're sitting near somebody, and even if he's not Jewish, but let's say he's Jewish, you should speak to him. Talk to him about so he says, what should I speak about? They're so not comfortable with speaking to someone that doesn't look like them. So I said,
You always got to get to those.
if he was a potential client for your business, would you have what to speak? He says, yeah. Because then I try to sell him, let's make a deal. So I said, in other words, godliness and Yiddishkeit is not so comfortable like business. So that's what you have to learn, how to speak about it in a normal way. And I hear what you're saying. First of all, I'll be very honest. It's not oratory skills.
Communication skills. It doesn't have
It's not just communication, it's also care and love.
Yeah.
If you let's say you have a coworker who's not a frum Jew, Begoli. everybody goes through life, say a kind word, you're there for them, compassion. It's not always, Dvar Hashem doesn't always mean a particular mitzvah. It's being a mensch. It's being making a Kiddush Hashem. A Kiddush Hashem. You can make a Kiddush Hashem even without words, through example. Invite him.
Yes, but you're not, I wouldn't call it spreading the light.
First of all,
Being a good example.
well, let me put it this way. A lot of people have had bad examples. They deal with Jews that turn them off. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
But then there's other things. You could always do like this. To say, you know what? Give me your email address. I'll share with you something. And you pass on something. It doesn't have to be your chachma. That's an example. With technology, you can send somebody a nice vart. So there's a lot of ways today. You don't have to be the one with all the skills. There's a lot of ways, if you care. I'll tell you a story that happened. I was once, I was going for a Shabbaton to the Hamptons. So the label Baumgartner is the Chabad guy in East Hampton. Right? And so on my way, I stopped for gas. So I fill up my car, and there's a young guy there. He's like an attendant, and he's parking cars. So I saw he was like at night they have a club there, a nightclub, and he was parking cars for people who were coming. So he asked me, "You staying for the party?" So I said, "No, not this party. I'm going to a different party." So he said, "What kind of party?" You know, they say in shul, "Why are you disturbing me while we're davening?" They say, "Why are you davening while I'm speaking?" You know, like that. Okay. So anyway, so I said, "I'm going to a different party." He said, "What kind of party?" I said, "A Shabbos party. Friday night, I'm going to..." And he was very interested. He said, "What is a Shabbos party?" So I told him. Maybe we should wait. Right? That's a healthy attachment because you're completely submerged and loved and cared for.
You had no choice though.
Doesn't matter, but it creates security.
That itself.
Security, when a bird is in a nest that's protected by parents and so on, creates security. When you feel secure, that's a healthy attachment. Because when you have security, you have trust, you have love, you have confidence. When a child, for example, comes home from school and the parents are always critical and belittling the child, that undermines, that's with detachment, not attachment. A human being by nature needs affirmation. It needs, especially in the early years, you'll see children want validation. They want to be validated. They want to feel that
The parents' approval.
Yeah, and when there's critique, children begin to, it undermines their self-confidence. You never heard of this concept before? Sure.
Me?
Yeah.
This is why you were in therapy for so many years.
No, he had a perfect childhood. He would never.
No, I'm saying this idea does not. You never heard this
I'm
idea.
in therapy because of this.
You have to explain.
Saying this, what I just said, does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. The basis of all life is based on this. What would life be without love? Would be very, very
Lonely and dark.
right, and worse than that, self-destructive. So generally speaking, when someone doesn't have a healthy attachment, they will look for attachments. That's where the basis.
You're saying that a person,
all basis of all addictions start from
but a
that.
person,
I could
what do you
relate.
say to people who say they
When
are
I was in high school, the same
self-proclaimed
thing.
lovers? This is my.
It's another
the
defense
girlfriend.
mechanism.
So you're saying
Because
they
I
really
didn't
said,
have any love at home.
Yeah, of course.
no, we ever
I
have.
don't care what they say.
Like type.
So what do you attach to?
A girl from the school down the block.
So when there's no healthy attachment, what happens is you start looking for other attachments. This can be attachment to a drug, to substances, to sexuality, to all kinds of things that create an illusion of intimacy when it's not real intimacy. This is the first time you ever heard such concepts in your life. This is like ABC. In any, the whole Torah is based on this.
But it's about just. It's about applying your mind to it. You know, sometimes common sense just doesn't enter our minds, and then when it enters, it's like, oh, of course.
Okay, so I'm sharing it now. That's what we're sharing. Yeah.
We get blinded by life. It just blocks blocks. Sometimes the lives we live block common sense in a lot of areas.
Do you know the word vulnerable, to be vulnerable?
Not happy.
Are you comfortable being vulnerable?
What makes you say I'm vulnerable? What am I vulnerable to?
I'm just asking. Are you comfortable to be vulnerable?
No. I don't like to be vulnerable.
Right, because vulnerable puts you at risk.
We have
Correct.
to.
You can be hurt.
The goal is to be able to be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation.
The goal is to be able
to be vulnerable.
The goal is to celebrate vulnerability with people you trust. People you don't trust, obviously, you can get hurt. But that's one of the symptoms. When you see somebody's uncomfortable being vulnerable, it means they probably don't have a lot of trust in their life. They have to protect themselves. You know the animal called the porcupine?
Sure.
Very sharp needles, right? But you know why? Because the porcupine's underbelly is the softest belly on earth. It's very soft and vulnerable. So it develops these very sharp needles to protect itself. So sometimes when you see somebody's very aggressive and very angry, it's just a protective. It's like armor. You know, people create defense mechanisms and layers of armor to protect their own insecurities and vulnerabilities. I remember someone came once to argue with me, just didn't stop arguing with me. So I asked a friend of his, what does he want? What is he making? Why is he arguing all the time? And he says he's hiding, it was Gavaldic answer. He says he's hiding his ignorance with his arrogance. Good word, huh? He's hiding his ignorance with his arrogance. You know, you're blustering, I know everything, when really you're just a little child. Anyway, the point is good, healthy Yiddishkeit is nurturing.
Isn't that
it's loving.
That's what Trump is
trusting.
Right, no?
It's Trump.
He's hiding his ignorance with his arrogance.
The anti-Trumpers say that. And some say the Democrats are that way. That all depends who you ask. Whatever you say about one, the other side says about the other.
100%.
Like someone tells me, look at these people, they listen to Fox. Whatever Fox says is God. And I said, so then give equal time. What about those that listen to CNN? They think whatever CNN says is God. We Jews don't bow, not to CNN and not to Fox. We have one, right? Exactly, one God, and he's not to be found in the media.
When I was in first year Beis Medrash, I discovered a song that talks about that. It's called "Master of Puppets." Hashem is the master of puppets.
Who's the puppets?
All the politicians. The president of the United States, the president of China, Putin, whatever.
Okay.
Putin.
Because halacha l'maisa.
Halacha l'maisa is.
Well, I have a shayla.
One second.
A
minute. I was going to say this. So one of the reasons we Farbrengen is because we try to celebrate together, and Yidden show unconditional love to each other, and it's not with an agenda. You know, look, when someone hurts you, you're not going to be easy open up to somebody else. And I know a lot of people don't get married because they went on a date. They fell in love with a girl, and the girl rejected them.
That's why I got married.
And they don't want to be hurt again, so they don't want to go out again. It's like somebody hurts your arm, you don't want to be injured again. But the fact is, in life has risks, and the only way you can really have true relationships is to have a certain measure of vulnerability and find people that you do trust. Now, is there a risk? There's always a risk. Of course, you lock yourself in a basement and never see anybody, you're not going to be hurt by anybody. But you're also not going to have relationships with anybody. So it's a two-way street, you know. So it's all about building healthy relationships. If you have a healthy relationship with yourself, you have a healthy relationship with God. If you have a healthy relationship with God, you have a healthy relationship with yourself. Most of us do not have complete healthy relationships due to all kinds of factors. So what's the goal? We come to Farbrengen, we learn Chassidus, we learn Torah to try to realign ourselves to a healthier relationship. It's really what it comes down to. It's a pretty simple formula. It's complicated because once you become a fearful person and you're insecure, you don't want to admit it. You know how many people that they put on a whole show to show that there's somebody that they're not really.
So isn't that just a distraction? How does that help in the relationship?
That's what people do. They don't want to expose themselves. So they're going to...
distraction, not necessarily helping.
Of course, but this happens all the time. This is what's called smart people are the ones that know how to cover... They cover their tracks. They don't want to show anything. They find an excuse for everything. You ever find somebody that's never going to change their mind? They just find an excuse for it. They say, well, let me ask you, you're 45 years old. Why don't you get married? Oh, I'm building my business. You know, or the next line is, I tried, or, you know, it's basically they don't want to face something that they're uncomfortable with. Now I understand it. It's like you have to be sensitive. Again, just like someone has a wound, they don't want their wound to be exposed. You don't want to be hurt. You don't want someone. But in life, you have to be able to be hurt to be able to have real relationships. You're not going to be able to have a relationship on your terms where you cannot be in some way hurt. That's how it is. You have children. Your children can hurt you.
No pain.
That's
no
life.
gain.
Is that true
Exactly.
in Hashem also? Is that,
Well, officially, Hashem doesn't hurt
right,
us.
that's one,
Yeah, but it's being open and vulnerable. Listen, if you really believe in Hashem, and then let's say Hashem doesn't do something.
Challenge. Why? Saying if
Sometimes He does something to you that you didn't want, like the Holocaust. We got hurt as Jews, but that's the challenge. Although you're hurt, you realize there must be some bigger plan. Yeah. This is like olive base. This is the basis of everything.
You get to a point where you're not really hurt. If you're a woman strong enough, you're not really hurt anymore.
well, it's different in relationships.
What is the single biggest taiva in a person's life?
I think everyone has their own type.
You know,
Beef jerky.
There's a different challenge for every person.
Maybe half of that.
You want to
The biggest type is sexual types.
Probably.
They're the most powerful.
You're speaking his language now.
What's the second closest?
money.
Money. Okay, fine. But the strongest one is sexuality. Why? Why is that the strongest? Do you ever think about it?
I have.
What's your theory? You're not.
We didn't get that one.
And you could have fooled me. I thought you were a tzaddik that killed your Yetzer Hara.
Yeah.
Not yet?
I'm not in the state of.
No, look, I told the guy that he killed his Yetzer Hara. He says, "Yeah, but we believe in Tchis Amazing." Came back full strength. Why is it the strongest type, you think? You know why?
Because that's what
God
keeps the world
wanted it.
alive.
Because
Also.
it's the deepest. It's because it's the holiest force in life. It's the
also
power to give birth. It's the power to nurture and love. It's the power of intimacy. And it's the deepest, strongest power in a person's life. That's why there's such a strong pull. It's the thing that's where. What does it say in Chumash? It's the closest place where two people come together. They become like basar echad, one flesh. I'm talking about in the holy sense of it. And therefore, it's a very powerful force in the negative as well. Anything that's powerful in one direction will always be powerful in other directions. That's how it is. You know? With the words, Tumah does not collect unless there's a lot of Kedusha. You know that? Like the maggots come to feed only where there's nourishment. They don't go where there's dry and arid. Only where there's a lot of energy, you always have a force that will come to nurse energy from there. What Chassidus calls Yenikas HaChetzenim. So you need to know that. So that's why it's so vital that a person find a healthy relationship in their lives, find a spouse, love them, love each other, marry, build a family. That is the most preemptive act a person can do to resolve so many issues in life. Because that creates healthy attachment. Home, even a home. Having a home is a healthy
It's a
attachment.
bad attachment.
So then I'm talking about find a good one. Didn't I just say?
That's much easier said than done.
So do you have friends? If you're talking theoretically, or you're
I'm
talking...
talking theoretically. I mean,
Oh, so theoretically...
you see how they're...
So theoretically...
You see what's out there.
Well, there's a healthy...
There are a ton of bad attachments out there.
But there's a healthy way to deal with a bad attachment and an unhealthy way. Do you realize that?
Okay.
So the healthy way to deal with a bad attachment is to find someone you trust, an objective party, that can help give advice how to deal with it. The bad way to deal with a bad attachment is to do it your own way and just don't know what you're doing and you just create more problems. There's healthy ways to deal with difficult situations. And there's unhealthy ways. There's always an option. In Judaism, there's no such thing as being stuck. There's always an option. Anyone that says stuck, I mean they're just stuck in their own heads. The Jews knew always how to get out of there. Huh?
We're stuck in our own Mitzrayim.
Exactly. Look what happened by Kriyas Yamsuf. What happened? The Jews came, the Yamsuf is in front of them. We're going to read it in 2 weeks, Shalach. The Mitzrayim are pursuing them. What do? They break into 4 camps. You know that? The Yerushalmi says. One group says, we have to surrender. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Let's go back to Egypt. Surrender. Another group says, let's pray to God for a miracle. A third group says, let's go to war. and a fourth group says, let's commit suicide, jump into the ocean. Is there another?
Suicide or go?
No, jump, nipple beyond, to jump and die in the sea. Better than going back to Egypt. It doesn't seem like there's any other option, right? What else can you do? And Hashem says to Moshe, all four are wrong. There's a fifth option. Vayiso, not jump, not to kill yourself in the sea. I told you to go to Mount Torah, to Har Sinai, to Eretz Yisrael. You move forward, and then things open up. And that's what they did, and that worked. Most of us psychologically go into four.
Nachshon was the one to jump, but is that similar to like Avraham Avinu went through the river?
Al Derek said, yeah. You forge ahead, and you go with the promise. You were told, move forward. I've dealt with people, loyalenu. No one should ever know. Tragedies of tragedy, worst tragedies. People lost entire families during the Holocaust. People now, I'm just dealing with a situation where parents are dealing with a 24-year-old daughter that committed suicide. You can't even put yourself in such shoes. How do you deal with that? Doesn't seem like there's any hope, right? And yet, Torah, Chassidus teaches us there's always a way forward. Doesn't mean that you don't have pain. I'm not saying you can just get rid of but there's ways forward. And people have suffered greatly. The Klausenberger Rebbe lost 11 children and a wife in the gas chambers. How could you build your life after that? And yet he did. There are methods, there are ways. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it's logical even. It's not logical. Because certain things you could say, look, Chana was forgiven for committing suicide after she lost her 7 children. What do you want from a mother? So, we have Rahman, we understand it's not easy. But yet, the Jewish people have managed. These are real serious tragedies. And there's lesser ones, but you have to always be confident there's a God and there's always a way out. We just don't know what it is at all.
Way forward or a way out? You said
way forward. A way out, I meant way out of being stuck in your place. That's what I meant.
Forward.
Way out is the way forward.
Forward.
So they say the only way out is through. That's what they say. You have to go through to get out.
Okay.
You can't.
Who am I?
Acceptance.
I'll accept.
So we got now to some heavy subjects here, huh?
Going through.
Oh, yeah, that's
Part of life.
This is what
You don't deal with this.
Why did Hashem appear to Moshe last week's parsha in a sneh? In a thorn bush?
Where else? I think it was very
Why did he
powerful.
appear in a beautiful fruit tree?
But I think it's very powerful.
Because he knew Moshe was smart, and he knew Moshe was going to say to God, you come to me in beauty, but you also come to me in suffering. The Jews are suffering. You're appearing to me in a beautiful tree.
I think it's powerful that...
so Hashem says, no, I'm appearing to you in a thorn bush. Are you listening or you're just speaking?
No, he's listening.
I was listening. I went...
Okay. What were you saying?
Forget it.
No, go for it.
No.
It's all right to be vulnerable. We just determined.
I'm not vulnerable.
Okay, good.
I'm in my first.
Why do you think it was good? It could be a good shot. Say it. All right, that's fair.
It's all right, whatever.
Rabbi, what do you?
Is there a seltzer or water? Can I take this? Your water?
I took it from there, so I have no idea. It was
It's from another yid.
It's from another yid, for sure.
Some of the chanafshi, right?
So if we have to go through different kinds of pain to get to our raw selves and go forward from there, is there a limit or of where we can
limit to what?
For that pain?
A limit to what?
In other words, okay, I'll just get straight to the point. Oh, I have to wait for Shmuel to come back to bring it up then. You go first.
After that.
We didn't go to the oily. I mean, it's not going anywhere.
Perfect time.
You have to have a preparation, a little bit of vulnerability.
A lot of
You
them.
go to the oil and then you fill it up.
Vulnerable.
Why do they rip up the kiddush?
Privacy, maybe?
What?
Maybe they were
No,
they were answered.
There's a real reason.
Maybe they were answered.
There's a series of books by a guy, I forgot his name, for kids, stories.
Yeah.
Of a guy who goes to the Kaisel and he pulls out people's notes and he reads them and he gives them answers.
He gives it.
Yeah, it's a whole.
And then he charges. He takes credit cards.
No, but really, here's the only place where you
Takes
rip up a kibble. What's the shot?
I mean, I don't know if it says anywhere, but it always seemed to me like you release it. It's like you're giving it away to the...
Oh, you mean it's not a Chabad minute or something? I thought it was exclusive to...
Nah, maybe those the ones that were pulled out are not needed. The tefillas were.
I know, but
already.
people go to other kibbutz tzaddikim, they don't...
No, they rip it up before they even die.
Oh, I saw that. I saw
In
that.
a way, I think it's very therapeutic.
I saw- yeah,
Like,
I
you
saw
write
that
the
last
letter,
time.
you write your heart out.
In other
and
kibbutz
listen to
tzaddikim,
all
they
the
don't...
places.
Do it.
People go...
Not by the person. No, but
No, it's not true.
I was never there, but I saw a video.
Really?
I think by other kibbutz, I think...
This is like the only place I ever saw that they do it.
I mean, I've only seen
I thought it was a Chabad.
Maybe it is. I don't know.
Oh, you mean it's not something that's Chabad?
I believe it says in the line.
Yeah, but the question is why they're asking.
And
I always saw it more like...
you're ripping it before you die. It's,
You know, you read it. I always saw it as like, you know, you're giving it up. You read it, and you're giving it away. Like, maybe not.
I thought there was a deeper...
Nobody knows me by my first name, Ben, my mother.
Someone's standing there, it's easy right in your thing.
So